something froze. There we go. Well, hello everybody. I guess we're live. My name's Claudio Ongaro. Uh-oh, something's going on here. Give me 1 second, people. Lodge, so we're good, we're live. Okay, my name's Claudio Ongaro. I've been at Cabela's Pro staff for a while. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time doing this. Doing the intro. We're at the hunting lodge right now. Clients roll in tomorrow. It's 31 degrees outside. That's Fahrenheit or Celsius if you're Canadian. That's very hot if you're American. So we're all ready. I've been here for 2 or 3 weeks. Me and the guides went spotting this morning. Had a really great morning of spotting. So we're excited, jacked up about obviously getting ready and getting after the hunting. And I'm just going to go through some calling with you, and then I'm going to go through some decoy setups that we use kind of for the different species based on flock composition and how it changes and progresses through the season. Now, I'm not the best caller. In fact, I'm not even a very good caller. I can get by, but I'm going to bring in Daryl Gilbert, who is one of the guides here. He's been with me for quite a while. Fantastic caller, great guide. And he's also my partner at the Saskatchewan Lodge, which is the Ongaro Saskatchewan Adventures. So come on in, Daryl. And the way I'd like to structure this is Daryl. Say hi, Daryl.
Hey everybody, welcome to roasting hot Alberta. Right?
Yeah, no kidding. It's hot. There's flies all over. So what I'd like to do, as I adjust my old man glasses so I can see what's going on, is I'm going to go through some of the setups that we use at the beginning and as the season progresses for the different species, and then right through at the end. And then we're going to get Daryl, and I'll grab my calls too, because I'll supplement some of his calling. And he'll just quickly go through, what we would be doing on Thursday morning, opening morning for Canada geese and some mallards, and then if some specs show up. So I'll just go through the quick basic setup of what I would use on opening morning. And for example, the hunt I have spotted, so I may be in on opening morning. Yes. So I've got, 200 Canadas in the field with some ducks that are puddling in a little puddle, and then they're coming out to feed in with the Canadas. So we're finding that the clients, as they age, they like to be an upright blind. So we're using an A-frame type blind with willows early in the season right now. And for decoy setup, we're going to go with some silhouettes, and this applies, the setup will apply whether you have 36 or 336. All I'm going to do is I'm going to put the blind, set it up, wind at my back, preferably, hopefully the sun's not in your eyes, and then I'm going to put either a gentle arc out in front of me, and if I only have 40 decoys, I would put 20 on the left and 20 on the right, loosely spread apart. Leave enough of a gap in between, and leave a fairly big gap in the early season, and you have to remember why. So a lot of these goslings have never really been with other geese, and the parents are highly competitive. So they don't really want to land with other geese. So if you put that your decoy spread too tight, they're going to skirt and land on the outside, and you're probably going to end up doing what we did for the first 10 years and going, well, they don't like the decoys. They don't like something. Well, no, they just don't want to be with other geese, including live. What I would do is I would have either a lazy arc with lots of room in the middle for these birds to land 15 or 20 yards away from other birds. If you only have 40 or 50 decoys, put a pot on the left, leave a 40-yard gap, and put another pot on the right, and they should target right into the wind, right into the middle. So, Daryl, how would you call those geese? They're 300 yards. They're on the approach. This is being on the X too, so big advantage, but go ahead.
So in a situation like that in early season, you really want to read the bird's reaction to your calling. If they're going to tell you everything, whether they're into it or they're not. Early season, like Claudio said, geese just don't want to be around other geese. It's just, that time of year, like you said, with the family groups, they really are competitive, and they're just not accustomed to being around big flocks and other groups of other geese. So they're going to land short on you a lot, but you need to basically figure out if they're going to react well to your call or if they're not, because every flock is going to be different at that point, because some maybe molt migrators, they might be accustomed to other flocks of birds because they've been migrating a little bit already. But then you've got fresh local production birds that really want nothing to do with it. So each single flock of birds is going to dictate whether or not you should be calling or the amount of calling that you want to do. So.
And it will leave you scratching your head, right? Because if you really look, and if you have a flock of like 10 or 12, you can really usually see the goose and the gander are a little bit bigger, and you know they may not actually want to do it. And if you have the birds that have molted and are on their way back, you know, they were born last year, they're a little bit more gregarious. So
yeah, so
lay on the call.
300 yards away, what I would start out with, they're approaching my field. They're not passing. They're not going away from me. They're coming to the field. I'm just going to get into some really natural noises, some clucks and some honks. Start getting a little bit excited. You want to get them excited to, you know, explain that there's food on the ground. And basically when geese get excited, they're getting pissed off. And they're telling the other geese to get away from them because this is my food. I don't want you here. This is my family's food. Like, get out of here.
Competition. Yeah,
so,
they're not calling each other and saying, hey, come here, there's food.
Yeah.
It's like there's other geese approaching. They're actually calling and going, get out of here. This is our food. Right?
Yeah. Very, very greedy. So what I'm going to start off is just some very natural noises. It's early season. You don't want to get carried away. The one thing I'll say is don't throw all your tricks at them right away, because if you throw everything you've got at them right off the bat, you have nothing in the future to finish them. If they circle you once and then circle you twice, you don't have anything to finish them anymore. So save some stuff, but get excited, and this is what we'll do here. So.
Now Daryl makes that look very easy, right? And it's not that easy to call like Daryl calls. Like, you're an extremely good caller. So try to get that way and just buy some calls, get out there and practice. And if you haven't started yet, I would go get a call and start practicing. Right?
Yeah, the main thing is one of the biggest things anyways is to learn when you're spotting. Just roll your window down when you're sitting there watching your field, and those birds are going to tell you what they want to hear to live birds. So when birds are approaching, you know, they've got their feet out, they've got their wings locked. Listen to what the birds sound like on the ground, what they're saying, and that's going to be the best teacher. I mean, anyone can sit here and tell you this is what noise you should make when, but those geese are going to be the best teacher you'll ever have. They're going to tell you every single note that, and it's all common sounds too. Like, you're gonna see a common theme over time. You know, you watch 2 or 3 fields, when all those birds are at the same point of their entrance to the field, those birds on the ground are going to be making the same noises as they approach the different cycles.
And a lot of times it's going to be the clucks, the moans, lots of double clucks, like lots of aggressive calling. And I mean, you can hear them, you know. Anyways, so that's the Canada goose calling in a nutshell in the open season. Now, if you have one really strong caller like Daryl in your group, and don't be afraid to blow. Like I can clock, I can loan. I can't do a sequence like Daryl can, but I can do a decent spit note. So Daryl do a quick sequence, like let's just do a short one, and I'll add in a couple spit notes. And then now what that does, it adds more excitement and more geese on the ground. So approaching birds are going, oh. And if there's 4 of you, and if one guy can just throw a cluck in there and another guy can throw a honk, now you have 4 guys producing a whole flock, and it's a game changer. It is. And if you're rather than sitting out there, just one guy blowing the odd honk, 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 right?
The other thing it helps with too is if you're hunting in a group of guys, kind of like we do, we hunt usually 5 groups of guys or so. If only one person is calling, it doesn't match your decoy spread, first of all. If you're trying to sound like multiple geese, but you'll never sound like, you know, 300 decoys or even 150 decoys. But if everybody's calling there, then what's going to happen is, if one person's calling, the birds are going to pull towards that direction usually. So if you have multiple people calling and just making some background noise, it's going to level that out, and the birds should finish up more true for you and be better for everybody shooting them, because they're going to be more centered up and not just dragging to the one side where the call is.
That's a big deal. It really is.
And when we're guiding, that's one thing we do, is we position ourselves as guides in the appropriate position based off the wind, which is going to bring the birds, say, across the hunters. Because, you know, if I have a wind coming from my left to right, and I get in the stack with the guys, I usually get just behind them, right? Stay out of the.
That's what we do.
Keep our hearing sane, anyways. After how many years of doing it? But
cool.
so you get behind them to the left, and that way these birds are going to pull across the hunters, and they're going to approach just like that, and just a perfect cross shot, right?
Because the calling can definitely help.
Can drag in either direction.
Yeah,
so.
cool. Okay, so let's just do that real quick, and I'll just add a couple spit notes and a couple double clucks, and go ahead. So there you go. And then when they get close, and you can calm it down a little bit as they approach. And then obviously when it's time, I mean, when their feet are dragging 15 yards off the decoys, give her. We still say kill them here, so I hope that doesn't offend anyone. Anyways, okay, we're gonna fast forward 2 weeks into the season now when we have speckle bellies roll in. And now that changes things a little bit here in Alberta anyways, and I'm sure in other parts of the country where, well, Saskatchewan Lodge too, when you start bringing in specs and you start mixing them with Canadas, now you can add more decoys, and obviously the spec decoys are a big asset. Like specs really like to be with specs. So what we'll do in that case is you can get into lay downs, or you can still be in an upright bind, especially if there's a bunch of juvies in there, but you're going to need a lot of decoys to do that. And I mean, if you have a whole bunch of decoys and the birds haven't been pressured, you can use a very similar rig, and they will approach the upright blind and the lay down straight on. So wind at your back, and you can either run a J with a longer leg with the front of the body, or same thing, a pot on the left, pot on the right, maybe a decent band of specs up in front where they can see them. And if you're using silhouettes, like we've been moving more and more to silhouettes, we put a whole bunch of them out there. Like keep them loose, like 6 to 10, 6 to 15 feet apart. Like when you look in a field, I mean, the birds are usually spread out fairly far apart. The only time they really get tight is if you have a bunch of hail damage and the birds are jammed in there in one spot and there's a whole bunch of birds. It'd be kind of like a herring ball in the ocean, right? Where the fish are in there feeding, and then it brings in the salmon, the whole bit. Kind of creates a little frenzy when you have a lot of food on the ground. With the geese, same thing. But typically, as far as the calling goes, well, now you got to decide what's coming in, right? Like is it the Canadas or is it the specs? And specs can be fairly easy to call, yet we find there's not a lot of guys in Western Canada that really call them, right? Yeah. And what I use, believe it or not, is, and I've had this on my lanyard. It's an old elk, like I don't know what this is. It's old fox coyote call it.
I'm still using a multi-year spec.
Yeah, and we'll just get into so the spec calling. I mean, this isn't about lessons on how to call, because there's a bunch of that on the internet. It's just sound excited. I mean, basically, it's just a ha 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 into the call and keep them coming. Go ahead. Yeah, specs, calling specs up here, anyways. It can get a little tricky at times, especially after the opening weekend and that. Like if there's birds around, or when the specs show up, right after they show up, they get pressured pretty easy. They seem to get more pressured than Canadas, so they respond a lot differently to calling in that. But they can get a little difficult to call specs up here as the season progresses. They don't take pressure well. But the thing about that is just don't get disheartened if they're not listening to your call. Try a few other things. One thing that works really well sometimes is actually not use a spec call and the blow Canada call. They'll respond sometimes better to a Canada call midway through the season than they will a spec call, and that's a little guide tip anyways, that insider information that works really well for us. But I mean, they do respond well to spec calls at certain times of year, but earlier in the season, as the season progresses, they're going to respond better as they get further down the flyway and they get more towards the breeding season. Then they want to pair up and they're more vocal, but it still works here.
Yeah, it definitely works, and you'll find it's the same thing what we were saying with Canada. Some of the birds are going to respond to it very well, and then others aren't going to respond to it as well as the others. So you really have to interact with every flock and figure out which ones want it and which ones don't. So
let's do a little bit of spec calling. Go ahead. and you have to listen to them. And I mean, you just have to get on a calling video, get a spec call. And it's just, you know what, it's just another ace in your sleeve. And when I find it really works is, let's say like over here, for example, this hunt that I have, I saw there's one flight of specs on the ground. It was early. I just got out there. The sun wasn't even up yet. And there was another high flight up there. I mean, you could tell they were coming in and they were migrating. And I mean, there's a few on the ground that were chirping, and those things just set their wings and came in. So if you're out there and if you just have some Canada geese out there, they may or may not, and a lot of times they might not look at you. And then sometimes you see them and they drop some altitude and they come down. So, you're out there, you may as well have the call, hit them with it, and it's fun. I mean, it's fun.
Just like Claudio's saying, is picture it as everybody has a toolbox. And, everybody has general tools in there, but as you get more experienced, people have larger toolboxes. And for different situations, you want to be able to have those tools to do the job. So by having a spec call or, different types of mallard calls or honker calls and knowing different notes, you're better preparing yourself for those situations where you're going to need those tools. So
That's right. All right, so now we're gonna speed up a little bit more into the season, and this is where it really starts to get interesting. So when the snows start to show up, and I mean, basically the snows now are from central Alberta all the way to, Manitoba. And so, and down into through the States. And what we see here is we get a time of year like that, late September, snows are starting to infiltrate, and the specs are already here quite heavy. So now you have a totally different flock composition, and you can't go out there with 200 Canada goose decoys and expect to kill 150 snow geese, and now our limit of specs is 8, and for 5 guys go shoot 40. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? You'd need nothing short of a miracle. So now we bring in the snow goose rig, and I'll explain how to set that up, and then you're going to mix in your spec decoys, and then you're going to engage the e-collars, okay? So, and we're allowed to use e-collars here in Alberta. Can you use them in Saskatchewan too?
Yeah.
Oh, it's all of Canada, right?
Yeah.
So in Canada, we can use e-collars in the regular season as long as it's only snow goose sounds. So I have a track, and it's just a feed track. And, what we like to do is, and I'll get into the calling first and then I'll explain the setup. So actually, let me do it the other way around. Let me explain the setup. So what I like to do is now we're going to engage in either lay down blinds with a whole bunch of decoys. And we really like the Cabela's Renegade Series blinds. Like, I love those blinds. The clients love them, and they work great. They're great when it's cold. They're comfortable factor, right? And then you can keep all your junk in there, like your ammo, and some of the hunters have snacks, and I mean your field bag. Anyways, lots of stuff to hang on to. But what we like to do is we'll run like a heavy, like we'll lay out. Let's say we've got the wind at our back, like Daryl and I are here, and we'll put the hunters in a line, I guess perpendicular to the wind with the wind at our backs. And it's important just to tilt your shooters a little bit. If you're a right-handed shooter, tilt your feet to the right. And what that does is, like, if the wind was coming straight from that back wall, it's just a safety feature. Like, if I'm twisted this way, I can't twist far enough to shoot that guy, and I can't twist far enough to shoot the guy next to me, but I got the entire kill zone out in front that I could shoot. A left-handed shooter, we would twist him the other way, so now he can twist and shoot this way. So once you have your blinds laid out, now what we'll do is we'll take the snow goose, mostly a soft-sized decoy, and we start stabbing those into the ground. Very, very heavy around the hunters. And then we'll go probably 60 yards wide with that feed band. And then we'll pick one side and we'll run a really, really long leg. And the opposite side will run a shorter leg, okay? And or if you don't have enough decoys, you don't even put that short side out there. But the short side would go on the side where you're expecting the birds to come. So let's say the wind's out of the, coming out of our back right here. It doesn't matter which direction. And off and downwind to my left is where the birds are approaching. Well, that would be the short side, okay? And then the long side would be on the opposite side. So they would come up, cross over that short side of the decoys, and then either follow that leg up and come all the way up. And the other thing that long leg does is, especially with specs and snows, now we're talking mid-season, they've been shot at a little bit more, they're coming quite high. Well, the further back they can fly over decoys, they'll start spilling air. And if you can get them to do that 250 yards back, by the time they get to you, they're lower, and their angle, their visual angle on you changes, right? Because if they're above you 75 yards looking down, they're going, we see you down there. But if they're approaching way out there and they're starting to drop down and it's 60 yards, they're only 30 or 40 yards off the ground, now they're looking at a totally different angle of approach. You're well hidden. As they come in, you know, you can hear us on the show. We're just going, wait, wait, wait. Then it's like, roll them, and out we go, you know. And I don't know if you supplement the calling, whether specs, if specs are an approach. And we always leave those e-collars. Before I let you go on it, I'm just going to talk about the e-collars. So what we like to put out is a minimum of 2, sometimes 3 e-collars. And we'll put them downwind out in front of us. I put them on a 45-degree angle, about 20 yards into the hole. And the reason I do that, at least 2 of them, and if there's a third one, I'll put it kind of 5 yards out from 100 feet, pointing into the hole. If you put it beside you or behind you, it will drive you crazy. And after 3 hours, you're not going to want to be listening to that thing anymore. And it gives them, you'll find that if all the sound is going into the hole, they will target that noise and they will center up. And then I just throw in either some snow goose calls or some spec calls as they approach. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so the e-collar is very important when you're hunting a snow rig because you just can't sound like that many birds. You know, we've got 1,500 decoys out, and it's just impossible to sound like that. And the track's so natural. I mean, most of them are recorded sounds from birds, you know, all across the flyway, but they just work so well. But yeah, supplementing calling on top of the e-collar, and it's kind of bird specific. Like the specs listen and react well when the e-collar's running. But ducks, when you have ducks working your spread and the e-collar's up pretty high, they don't want to finish. They'll come down. You know, they can get shootable range, but they're not going to finish with their feet down all the time. Sometimes they will. I mean, they can always do that. But most of the time, they just don't want to finish. They'll just circle you and circle you and circle you. So you remember that the e-collar is not the be-all, end-all, that you do sometimes have to shut it off in order to kill ducks and that. But
right.
You definitely want to supplement calling for specs with that, and then throw in duck calls there as well when you turn the volume down, or even Canadas as well. Big Canadas don't really like the e-collar blasted, and they don't really mix with snows too much, but lesser Canadas.
The lesser Canadas love it. The big ones, I mean, you can throw everything you have at them, and they'll just, and in fact, what we find is when we get, you know, a heavy migration of snows and specks in the area, we actually lose a lot of our, like, you can't find a Canada. Like, we'll go, you know, a week and we'll kill 6 Canadas. You know, all week we'll kill specks and snows and big numbers. Canadas, I don't know, they're just gone.
You'll be sitting on a field of Canadas, and then as soon as the snows notice them in it and find that field, you'll just watch your Canadas slowly disappear until they're gone.
Right. I forgot to mention, in that, you know, once we have that big feed band out front and the long arms, like if you're spotting and you've got, let's say, you know, 2,000 or 3,000 speckle bellies and 1,000 snows, the reason we use the snow rig with the specs is it like you can put out enough decoys to hide the hunters. And we'll either lay down in white suits. I've got some stuff that I made that is white, or white suits, or any of the white stuff. Just get white and get in a lay down chair or lay in a backpack, lay in your field bag, get in there, and lots of decoys around you, and you can start mixing those specs just downwind you, because you want those specs to finish as close to you as possible, and you want them something to look at. And they'll do it with the snows, but it's best to have some spec decoys out there, no doubt about it. So get those spec decoys out in front of you in that 40, 50 yard spread that I mentioned, and just get them out 10, 15 yards out in front of you, and they'll usually seal the deal. And in fact, what happens with the specs sometimes, and I want to mention this, like, and the snows too, but the specs are notorious for, they'll come in so hot and so fast that, and low, like 6 to 10 feet, 20 feet off the ground, and they'll be just whiffing, screaming. Well, that's when you have to have patience. Like, when you see that, you know that those birds are committed. But if you come out, the chance of shooting a bird at 15 yards, whipping over your head, doing 55 miles an hour is almost impossible. So just keep your hunters settled, and if your buddies want to shoot, just go, whoa, guys, whoa, let them rip by. And you'll hear us on the show do it all the time. We're managing the hunters as much as we're managing the birds, and they'll just go past you. They like what they saw. They'll usually wheel downwind, settle down, and get ready to set down, and that's it. And if there's no wind, it's especially difficult. Okay, so we're going to fast forward a little bit more. So let's get into about mid-October, and the speckled bellies are gone. They're sucking on margaritas in the Gulf of Mexico and in Louisiana where it's warm, and the snows are starting to roll in heavy. And now, of course, there's some little Canadas around, but now the big Canadas start to congregate. You have the Canada goose migration coming in. The big boys are back. And although the big boys have been shot at a little bit, they're starting to get smart. So we're getting back to, you have the Canada goose rig, and now you've got your snow goose rig. So the snow goose rig is going to be pretty much the same to what we had, except you can drop the spec decoys. I mean, you can put them out there if you like, but I mean, it's just a lot more work. You're better off throwing a few hundred more, or some duck decoys. Definitely get some spinners out there because there's always ducks wheeling around, and the motion does not scare the snow. So what we'll do then is we'll put out, and I haven't discussed numbers yet. Now you can get it done with as little as 250 snow goose decoys. We found that since they opened up the big limits and the conservation seasons in the States, and now there's even guys in California that are chasing them, they're getting smart. So we found that this spring, our biggest success came from putting out about 1,100 of the sock decoys and about 600 full bodies. And the level of commitment there was pretty solid. Like, I mean, our last group, when we switched it up, we started throwing the book at them. I mean, Brad went 266, I shot 300, and Jay shot 150 on the last morning in a cold, snowy morning, and the hunters finally said, like, we shot enough. So the more decoys you have for snows, the better it is. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, you're probably looking at me going, oh, man, like, that's a lot. And it is a lot. But if you have 5 or 6 buddies, and every guy goes out and buys like 10 or 15 dozen, they add up real quick, right? And, you know, if you have to trade off full bodies for more socks, just get more socks. Just like keep building that spread and get it bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, you know, just the same setup, the e-collars, the big feed band. What I'll do is I'll put an extra partial feed band. I just find that, you know, it just gives them another spot to finish. And if the wind switches, like if you get a wind that switches, you have an extra point. It's hard to illustrate. And if you go on some of my social media stuff or some of the TV shows, you go back, you'll see some of the aerial views. You'll actually see how we set up the decoys, and it seems to work. But now I want to get into the later season Canada goose hunting. So, good stuff. Yeah, and it can get really good, but they can be pressured, right? And it's a lot of fun. On our end, like, you know, clients are paying us to deliver, not look at a bunch of birds flare off. So, you know, what we started doing is putting out a few more decoys. Like, we used to put out 70 or 80 full bodies, then we went to 100 full bodies. Well, now we're finding we're going out with 200, 250 silhouettes, and we started doing that last year, and our kill rate in the late season went up. You can gauge the pressure. There's 2 setups that we like to use, and whether it's in laydowns or in upright blinds, it's kind of the same. So, and you'll have to gauge the pressure. Like if you go and you can smash them straight on, well, smash them straight on. Set the willow bush up, or set your laydowns out. Put some decoys around you, pot on the left, pot on the right, a bunch around the laydowns to get you concealed. Keep the wind at your back and have those things approach. If you've tried that a couple times and those birds do not, even if you have a great caller like Daryl with you, well, what you have to do then is those pressured. And what we'll do then is we'll set up the blind, and then we'll set the birds out. Rather than coming at our back, we'll have them approach from the side. So imagine I'm the blind and the wind is over that way. I'm going to set the decoys out in front of me, And you can run a J either way. Like I like to run the J on the far side and have a long tail come out, and then the main body upwind and to the right of me. And then I keep those about 35 or 40 yards. The main body is out maybe between 5 and 30 yards up in front. Just imagine a big Nike insignia. Birds will come up, they'll catch that outside edge, and they should target the main body. And when they're up there looking, they're looking for something in the decoys, because every time they approach decoys for the last 6 weeks, they've been shot at, and they learn quick. Well, now they're looking at decoys. If you're in a blind and even layout around you, you'll be fine. Just get them out there 30 yards. You'll be shooting them right in the side while they're looking straight ahead. And that's a killer approach. And I know we used to shoot the speckle bellies that way when there weren't as many around. They got wise quick. We would go 60 or 80 yards downwind because they'd come in low and they'd start to climb when they saw the decoys. Well, we got them out there 30 yards when they started to climb, and it seemed to work. So the calling, though, is a little bit different in the late season, especially when you're outside of the decoys. So go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, you really need to watch when you're calling in that situation, just because you're not in the decoys. So you're in that situation, you're not trying to attract attention to you. You're trying to draw it to the decoys. So you're gonna do a lot of more calling on the approach and in the mid to finishing area. But once you get to that finishing area, you're really just gonna let the birds do their thing and let them basically get right into the kill zone then. And if they need a little bit of enticing, you can throw a few quick clucks in there, but you really don't want to draw any attention to you. So
right.
It's just
because they will.
Yeah.
Like if you do that, you start calling hard. And imagine if you're in the lay down blinds, 25 yards off to the side. Well, what you're trying to do is not bring them to you. And if you start calling hard, they start looking at you. Well, now they're going, oh, there's 5 guys in layout blinds, right? Or there's 5 guys sitting in a bush or whatever. So like when they're out in the distance, like get their attention. Hopefully you're on the X, you've done your homework, few clucks, few moans. As they get close, just let the decoys do the work, and use some motion. Like if you can get any motion decoys, and we've used the clones for quite a while. They work quite well. Just get them upwind and to the side, right in the flock. Get those flapping in. It's usually enough to keep them on track. And I wouldn't do any flagging if you're off to the side. I mean, that's just suicide, right? That's just putting a flag up saying, hey, we're right over here. Anyways, you know what, everybody? We have to have a quick bite to eat and go spotting. I hope you enjoyed it. I see we had a little too low frame rate thing. I hope that wasn't too bad. Anyways, we have a bunch of work to do. If you have any questions, shoot us some information on social media or comment on some of the social media stuff we have, and we'll try to answer it. We got to go spotting. Thanks, Daryl.
No problem. Let's get out there.
Happy and safe hunting. Cheers, all. Oh, we're going to save it.